Good evening and welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your guest host, Krista Kafer, Sunday columnist with the Denver Post. We're joined by Patricia Calhoun, founder and editor of Westword, David Kopel, law professor and research director at the Independence Institute, Tyrone Glover, civil rights attorney with Tyrone Glover Law, and Hugo Chavez Ray, chairman of the Colorado Hispanic Republicans. A new report on Denver International Airport's failed Great Hall partnership deal reveals just went wrong. Badly wrong, with a $1.8 billion deal with Great Hall Partners. What did we learn from this, and how can we avoid this kind of costly mess in the future? Patricia, what do you think we should do differently next time?
Well, I would argue that Denver City Council should read the contract and maybe have more than a minute to study it before they sign it. So this goes back to August 2017, 5 years ago, when Denver City Council approved this mammoth contract for a $34-year deal with a Spanish company, Ferrovial, which was leading the charge, really didn't have experience with airports in this country. And it was, if you looked at the plans, it looked like they were going to turn the Great Hall under the tent, which is a really interesting space, into a shopping mall. Not a good idea. And it took 2 years finally for everyone to realize just how badly things were going. Now, 3 years after that, after we pulled the plug on the deal, we find out kind of why things went so badly. Part of it is a sloppy top-down administration by DIA. Kim Day did not have her hands. She was micromanaging at the same time she wasn't doing an overview. We'd already heard reports on she was trying to pick out bathroom tile. That is not probably what the chief administrator of DIA should be doing. They should be looking at the big picture. Are we on time? Are things working? Is the partnership working between Great Hall Partners and Ferrovial? It was an incredible boondoggle. I just flew into DIA Wednesday, pleasantly surprised. Things were smooth. Construction is going to go on, till 2027, 2028. I'd like a little more signage that tells you where to go because you get blocked out at every corner. I think it would be nice if Michael Hancock welcomed you to the city and explained we're under construction. But still, it's working now. Let's hope it stays on track.
I was thinking like comfort puppies and more tacos, but I'll get back with them. David Kopel, these kinds of public-private partnerships are necessary for large projects. Are there things that we can learn from this as Denver continues to expand and develop its resources?
96 pages of what you can learn, folks, and that's the magic of the internet today is you can read in all the gory detail exactly went wrong, of which there's quite a lot. And as Patty said, yes, there was the sloppy top problem, which, you probably, with the friends you might have seen it in home renovations, like, oh, we're doing this home renovation, and then like 5 months into it, one of the spouses says, oh, I think the wall should be over there instead of over here. Oh, and the bathroom sink, we should have a double sink instead of a regular sink. And so, yes, the change orders coming down from the top in a sloppy way, those were part of the problems. But there was something much more fundamental. It was that this was a project that was too big for the Hancock administration to do. The Hancock administration has a long-time conflict between the grandiosity of its vision and its competence to execute. So however great the vision is, if you don't have the ability to bring it to success, you shouldn't do it, and you should do something smaller. And that's ultimately what happened at DIA, where it was scaled down. And as the report says, once they switched contractors and made it a much smaller project, things have mostly worked successfully.
Tyrone, he's saying that it's a competence issue. Do you think it's a competence issue, or do you think there's something else going on here?
We've had P3s work in the city. We've had P3s nationally work at other, similarly situated airports. One of the interesting things I thought about the report is sort of the focus on the contract and the language in the contract. One of the first things you learn in law school, or I learned in law school at least, when interpreting statutes or laws is the difference between may and shall. right? And I thought it was interesting that the report focuses so much on how much there's all of these mays, there's all of this ambiguity in the contracts. And so when it was time to change course, when it was trying to potentially terminate some of these relationships, it was just a big sloppy top, and no one could get out from under them. No one could change course. So I think, going back into this, because I think we're ultimately going to have to, really making sure that we take time with the contract, and we make sure that there's some real binding language like shall or must.
Hugo, when it comes to politics, nothing is really in the rearview mirror entirely. Things have a way of coming back up when elections happen. Do you think this gives the current administration a black eye and hurts Democrats going forward, or do you think it all will be forgotten?
Well, the first most glaring thing that I think we can look at on this project is that they went out and hired a foreign entity. I'm not sure about all the options here in Colorado, but I would think that we could find a company within the state that might be a good prospect for the project. And this project for this Spanish company was a little new to them because one of their previous projects, like London Heathrow, the airport was basically shut down while they did their work, whereas here it's been a functioning airport during the project. So there's that part of it, but it sounds to me like too many hands in the kitty, lack of coordination between the partners and DIA, and the Spanish company took a nice little exit fund as a result. So they win, and I think DIA and the city of Denver loses.
A year ago, Colorado mandated employers post pay ranges on job postings. Today, there are more job seekers, but fewer online job postings, according to a new study. Additionally, this year's Colorado minimum wage has increased to $12.56 an hour. Denver's rose to $15.87 an hour. Tipped employees also saw increases. Does this alter the economic prospects for our state? David, we know that when labor costs go up, prices go up. Do you see this affecting our economy and inflation going forward?
Likely, yes. And, the labor market is pretty tight these days. And, just about everybody's seen the signs in the stores or the restaurants about places that have had to cut back their hours because they can't find enough employees. And people have also seen all the signs advertising jobs for $15 an hour. No need for a minimum wage. That's just where the market is going with the supply and demand. So the problem right now for folks who are looking for a job isn't necessarily finding a job. The problem is they keep getting a pay cut every month because of inflation. When inflation's 9% a year, that means your $15 an hour buys 9% less. So that's a large pay cut, especially for someone who's, just kind of making it on a month-to-month basis. Now, the economists argue about what causes inflation, but whatever it is, the Biden administration seems to be doing a lot of it. And my personal view is at least part of the cause is all the funny money they've been putting out, and the Trump administration before that, with extreme deficit spending and the Federal Reserve going wild.
Tyrone, the legislature did this to help labor, to make pay higher, to make pay more transparent, to help people of color and also women be more competitive when it comes to applying jobs. Could it, however, backfire and mean that labor ends up getting less than what they bargained for?
I think, potentially in the short term, but the long-term vision is for this to ultimately play out in favor of workers and in favor of workers who've oftentimes been marginalized historically. And I think one thing we do have to also remember is, raising these wages helps us to continue to compete for labor, right? And continue to keep people who are able-bodied and able to work in Colorado. We're competing with the on-demand economy these days, right? I mean, you can go get a $15 an hour job, or you could, work for DoorDash or Grubhub or drive an Uber, right? And knock that out of the park. And so I think this is also, indicative of us trying to keep up with the times, because I've seen those those restaurants in my neighborhood. Where they've had to close doors and shut down because they didn't have enough staff, right? And a lot of times that staff is going for better opportunities, and that's coming from the on-demand economy.
Hugo, Democrats passed these in the legislature, and I know that they meant well, but if it has some adverse consequences, could they see blowback when it comes to election? Could this actually be an issue that Republicans could vote on, run on?
Absolutely. Let me start by saying I'm not a big fan of the minimum wage. I believe that people should strive to do better, and when government puts their hands into anything related to business, it's almost always a disaster. So I believe government cannot and should not be the solution to everything. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people that believe it should, and it becomes more intrusive almost every day. Government regulations are running off the charts, and small businesses are struggling because of it. So the small business owners that I speak to say they want the government out of their pockets and out of their business, and let the free market take the lead in what takes place with regards to wages and workers. So unless there's something really egregious, government needs to stay out.
Patty, you know absolutely everyone in this town. What are you hearing about these mandates on costs and labor?
Well, let's start with the demand to put in the requirement that you have to put a salary in a job posting. The law of unintended consequences stepped in here a year ago because outside companies who are hiring remote workers, a lot of them didn't want to advertise for Coloradans because they didn't want to have to put the salary in their ads. As an employer, I think it's actually great to have the salary in there. It cuts down on a lot of back and forthing, awkward conversations. People know what they'll be earning if they come to you, and they'll decide whether or not they want to join. By the way, I am still looking for a news editor, so you can look up that ad. But on another level, the minimum wage, it's not just that it's $15.85 now or $86. It's going to be going up over $17 come January. So you have the small businesses now that are really in trouble, and I'm talking about the restaurant types, not places that can definitely afford it. And what's going to happen is we're going to all be paying more because those restaurants are going to have to raise their prices. And that's the right thing to do, to have a real scale of what things are worth. But it is going to be really tough times come January for a lot of these smaller businesses because they're going to have to meet that. And it's still barely what people can get by, even if they don't live in the heart of Denver, even if they live in a cheaper area. $18 is not going to do it.
Around 400 Coloradans donated more than $363,000 to Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney's campaign. Nearly 140 Coloradans donated about half as much to her opponent, Harriet Hageman. Cheney is one of two Republicans on the January 6th committee investigating the Capitol riot. Why do so many Coloradans care about a race that's outside of their borders? Why do we care so much, Tyrone?
We're talking about Liz Cheney here, right? She has national name recognition, I dare say celebrity. And even though I think Coloradans and Democrats want to move forward, right? We want to put forth our own candidates, and own sort of vision for the future. There is still the sort of never Trumpism that is very much under the surface. And there is that, I guess I wouldn't say paranoia. I think it's a very real concern that sort of rise is going to come back. And Liz Cheney, I think, has been viewed by folks as a reliable Republican who was against Trump from the beginning and stood against him and is actually serving on the committee that's looking into the January 6th riots. So I think that's why there is not just a Colorado interest in this race, but dare I say a national interest.
Hugo, we definitely see a tension within the Republican Party between those who are very Trump-oriented and people who would like to move on and put the Trump era behind us. What are you seeing within Hispanic Republicans as the head of the Hispanic Republicans here in this state? What are you hearing?
Well, Hispanic Republicans and actually those that are not Republicans right now, as far as registration, they live a very conservative life. So the people that we talk to, the majority of them I've talked to love Trump because of what he'd done, the fact that he promises kept, unlike other politicians. With regards to Liz Cheney, she's a caricature in my opinion. She's going to lose and lose bad in her primary. I would be interested in seeing the list of the 400 in Colorado. I want to see if I recognize anybody. We already know there's some high-dollar individuals that contributed, such as Phil Anschutz. And so what we have to do is look at the motives. And you ask, well, why are Coloradans interested? Well, the ones that are donating to Cheney are people that are anti-Trump, and they want to see her succeed, kind of to stick it in Trump's eye. It's going to fail. It's not something. It's not a good strategy. It's their money. They can throw it away if they want to. But more interestingly, there's Democrats that are also sending money to Liz Cheney, and for the very same reasons. So I think it's going to be an interesting primary next Tuesday.
Patty, I know a number of Democrat, Independent, and Republican women who have given to Cheney's campaign here from Colorado. When you look at the women that you know, are you seeing a trend like that?
My mother gave money to Liz Cheney, and I can say with the encouragement of her daughters, I could not disagree with you more on this. I mean, what's interesting about Liz Cheney is, I would have said 10 years ago, kind of the whole Cheney family could almost be considered caricatures of themselves. But you see the evolution in some ways that Liz Cheney has made. I mean, she wasn't for same-sex marriage, and then she got in trouble with her own sister. And she admits now that her original position was wrong, and she now is supportive of it. But she still voted for Trump's policies, 93% of the time? But in this case, what Liz Cheney is doing, I think, is willingly taking on a kamikaze mission for democracy with her interest in pushing for the January 6th investigation. She could probably have, if she hadn't done that, she could probably still have won this primary. She is not going to now. I mean, I've driven through Wyoming a lot. She is not going to win this election. But she made a conscious choice that she was going to go, I think, in favor of democracy and the people's right to know, and good for her.
Dave, when you look at the names of people who have donated, the Post article that I read basically mentions some people who gave high dollar amounts, but a lot of ordinary people also gave small amounts to the Cheney campaign here from Colorado. Are we seeing, though, a division within the party, maybe based on kind of the grassroots versus, I don't know, the grass tops, if you will, the sort of intellectual Republicans here in this state?
Well, sure, there are plenty of Republicans who still like Trump, but the people of all parties who are donating from Colorado or elsewhere outside Wyoming who are donating to Cheney are donating because it's a Wyoming race, but it's about a guy who tried to steal a national election. After the election, Attorney General William Barr ordered the U.S. attorneys throughout the country to look into possibilities of election fraud or irregularities. And he came back several weeks later and reported truthfully that whatever they found, it was way too small scale to have made any difference in the election outcome. And Trump got that same message from every single one of his advisors who were on top of the data and the political procedures. And nevertheless, he persisted. Just as with phony claims of a stolen election, he did the same thing in 2016 when the Colorado State Republican Convention, the majority of the voters there, gave all 35 delegates to Ted Cruz and 0 to Trump, and he said, oh, that was stolen too. Again, no evidence, complete brazen lie. All election deniers are bogus. That includes Hillary Clinton, it includes Stacey Abrams, it includes every one of their enablers, a lot of whom are Colorado Democrats, and it even includes some of the members of the January 6th committee who made their own bogus claims about stolen previous presidential elections. In contrast, Liz Cheney, like her father, a great Republican vice president, is a truth teller who staunchly stands up to bullies, defends American values, and has steely resolve.
Political prognosticators say that the GOP is competitive in the O'Day-Bennett race for Senate. The 7th and 8th congressional districts are also looking good for Republicans. The GOP hopes to woo Hispanic voters who make up 16% of the voting Colorado electorate. Nationally, polls show Hispanic voters dissatisfied with President Biden. How do you think that will play out here in our own state? Hugo, as the head of the Colorado Hispanic Republicans, how do you see it playing out?
Well, I think it's going to be a favorable year, obviously. How favorable remains to be seen, but on the street, the meetings we have with community leaders, business owners, a lot of which are Democrats, we have had very encouraging responses saying that they're not voting Democrat this November. They're going to vote Republican because of everything that has come down the pike from the Democrats, from the state legislature, from the government, from this governor, and on some national issues as well. Of course, Biden is tied to just about every candidate out here, including Michael Bennet, who is, I think, more vulnerable than the media wants to portray. So I predict that there's going to be a high turnout this November, and that Hispanics are going to significantly increase in voting Republican this cycle for the reasons that I just stated. So we're very optimistic.
Patty, in the time that Westward's been around, the state's gone from being sort of purplish red to purple to fairly blue. Can these Republicans break through that?
Well, certainly, if you look at how the 8th has been drawn, it's definitely going to be a much more competitive race. They're fascinating lineups because I think in the 7th and the 8th, very, very different candidates. Ironically, because we don't have the Ron Hanks running against Bennett, that we instead have Joe O'Dea, that's also going to be a lot more competitive than it would have been. And I look forward to hearing all these candidates, and I would hope Colorado voters vote for the candidate and not for the party.
Dave, we've got some really strong candidates in those positions, mainstream centrists, and simply because the primary didn't go the way that the election deniers thought it would. Do you think that these Republicans have a chance come November?
One thing that adds to their chance is the very condescending attitude towards Hispanics of so much of the Democratic leadership that considers itself, wrongly, to be woke and progressive. For example, according to the modern political correctness, you're not supposed to say Hispanic or Latino anymore. You're supposed to call these 60 million Americans Latinx, or maybe it's Latinx, I'm not sure. But according to a political poll, only 2% of Hispanics actually prefer the word, 41% consider it offensive, and 30% say they're less likely to vote for someone who uses it. Another thing that offends some Hispanic voters is this idea that people from all sorts of places, all kinds of different origins, came to the United States before there was a United States, like the Tejanos in South Texas, or from wherever, that they're all supposed to identify and think the same way just because some of them have a similar skin color. And then third, and I think this is about Hugo's point about talking to the small businesses, is that people who are upward striving and consider themselves to be living the American dream tend to vote against a party that they think overrates small business and against a party that they think doesn't self-identify as being proud to be American.
We are seeing some changes within the electorate right now, Tyrone. Do you think some of that will play out in the upcoming races?
Absolutely. And I think to everyone's point here, you can't look at any particular group as a monolith, right? And I think that both parties have been guilty in the past of doing that, of thinking there's certain issues that are just going to carry the day, whether it be with Hispanics, whether it be with blacks, whether it be with women. And what we're seeing, I think, is really a shakeup where folks are more informed. They're really looking at, the particular, and I would say almost localized and state issues, because I don't think that Biden is really, it's not as much of a top-down race. He's, the local politicians' wagons are not hitched to Biden. And so I think there's much more attention on the state, on the local. And when you do that, there's more informed voters. And so I think that either party, if they start to treat these groups as a monolith, do it at their peril.
And now for our favorite segment, the disgrace of the week. Patty.
I hope we are not waiting 3 years for the report on what happened on the central I-70 flood zone on last Sunday night, and not just under I-70, but related streets and neighborhoods. That was disgraceful.
Dave.
The town of Crested Butte has outlawed natural gas in new home construction, which is a very dangerous thing for people, because it means when you have times when the electric grid has to reduce capacity, then people aren't going to have the power they need to heat their homes or cook or even to use hot water. And in fact, the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation has already warned that the part of the national grid that Colorado's in is at serious risk of electrical shortfalls. So making people completely energy electricity dependent is backwards.
Tyrone.
Denver Police Department, again, in the news. A couple weeks ago, firing into crowds in the lower downtown district. This week, a high-ranking police sergeant arrested and charged with internet luring of a child. What's going on over there?
Hugo.
For me, very predictably, it is the very partisan fueled rate of President Trump's residence by a leadership that is very corrupt at the DOJ and FBI. It's never happened in our history, and I believe it's going to have some long-term consequences for the Democrats.
And now let's say something nice, but keep it a bit zippy. Patty.
Very close to here, Redline Contemporary Art has 48 hours of art. Redline has been a beacon during the pandemic, so good for them.
Our Colorado Constitution and its taxpayers' Bill of Rights, that's the reason the tax refund checks are coming. It may come with a signature of somebody who's taken all the credit. Don't believe it. It's the people who get the credit who put our Bill of Rights in our Constitution.
Denver investing $150,000 in federal money into overnight parking to help people who are experiencing homelessness.
For me, very personal. Our 9th grandchild, Ellie, is now 2 months old, and number 10 is on the way in September.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you to all these wonderful panelists for your insights. And also thank you for watching Colorado Inside Out on PBS Channel 12. Check us out at pbs12.org or on our YouTube channel, and have a spectacular night.